So this is my larynx model, and this is the thyroid cartilage that is the largest of the three laryngeal cartilages, and it forms the laryngeal prominence, which is the Adam's apple, and it reflects the mass of the vocal folds, which is directly related to fundamental frequency. And then that's number one, or yeah, labeled number one. And then two is my cricoid cartilage, and it's a signet shaped and connected to the first tracheal ring via a ligament, and it provides attachments for different muscles and cartilages responsible for opening and closing the airway. Arytenoid cartilages sit right on top of it, these two little blue things. And then the hyoid bone is number three, and it's a floating bone, and it is connected to laryngeal cartilages, and it's also support for the tongue and larynx, and it is horseshoe shaped, and it is a mobile structure acted on by several muscle systems, and it's an anchoring structure for the tongue. And then the epiglottis protects food from entering during swallow, and it's a leaf-like little structure, so like it goes down. And then the arytenoid cartilages are in it. Let's see, the blue things labeled 5. You can kind of see it. And the arytenoid cartilages are important because they allow for tensing and relaxation and approximation of the vocal folds, and they sit on top of the cricoid cartilage that was mentioned earlier. And then the first tracheal ring is this little yellow pipe cleaner labeled number 6, and it is the bottom of the larynx and attaches to the cricoid cartilage like I mentioned earlier via a ligament. And then number 7 is the recurrent laryngeal nerve, which is here and on both sides. It goes down, comes back up, and it controls all intrinsic muscles of the larynx except for the cricothyroid muscle, and it helps open, close, and adjust the tension of the vocal cords. And it's at a high risk during like heart surgery because it goes under the aortic arch, and so it can be easily injured. And then the superior laryngeal nerve, this one, it's number 8, and it has internal and external branches. It innervates the cricothyroid muscle on the external side, and the internal enters through the thyrohyoid membrane, which is what this is trying to show. And it supplies sensory information to the supraglottis, which is important for swallowing, and its motor nerve portion also increases the tension of the vocal cords, allowing for those high notes when you're singing. And then number 9, the base of the tongue. It's important because it allows for elevation of the hyoid bone, which is important during swallow and also important in speech. And the valleculae, it temporarily holds number 10. Try to make it look like a little ditch type thing. It temporarily holds saliva to prevent the initiation of swallow. And then the piriform sinuses. This isn't to scale, but let's see. Which side do I label? 11. Can't really see right there. 11. It lies at the level of the vocal folds, and there are pockets where food may fall before or after the swallowing reflex is triggered, and serve as a valve at the top of the esophagus. See, there's the esophagus. And then the ventricular folds are 12. I did my best to make them as close as I could to the, there we go, 12. I did my best to make them as close as I could to the true vocal folds, but because it's so tiny and for my learning, and so I could see every other little structure, I put them higher up and not like they should be, but 12. And they're important because they suppress dysphonia, and they're also another laryngeal valve that helps prevent foreign objects from entering into the lower airway. And then the true vocal folds are the red number 13 down there, and they give us voice and the main engine for sound, and they're lengthened and shortened via the cricothyroid muscle, which is number 14. And the cricothyroid muscles contribute to increasing vocal fold length and tension. It's a vocal fold tensor. its portions are thought to rotate the thyroid inferiorly and pull the thyroid anterior too. It has two parts, the pars recta and the pars oblique. It's the only tensor muscle of the larynx. And then the posterior cricoarytenoid are these like blue and purple looking like pipe cleaner things. Number 15. And they're fan-shaped muscle, the only abductor muscle of the vocal folds. They rotate the muscular process downward toward midline, which moves the vocal process laterally and superiorly. This lengthens and elevates and abducts the true vocal folds, opening the glottis. And then the lateral cricoarytenoids are those like these small. It's labeled 16 on the model. You can't really see it from how I'm. 16. And they are for vocal fold adduction. The contraction of these pull on the muscular process of the arytenoids and rotate the vocal process inward towards midline, closing the glottis. And then the cricothyroid joint is number 17. And it allows for the forward bending of the thyroid over the cricoid and the anterior-posterior gliding of the thyroid in the horizontal axis. Both of these movements impact tension and length of the vocal folds. And then the cricoarytenoid joint is number 18. That side right there, kind of. And it allows for rocking inferior toward midline or away from the interior of the cricoid, bringing the vocal processes and the vocal folds into adduction and abduction respectively. And then the hypopharynx, I did my best because it's not to scale obviously, so I just tried to label the region. But it starts like up here at the base, and it's the lower part of the pharynx. It's also known as the laryngopharynx, and it is shared by the three structures: the piriform sinuses, the posterior esophageal wall, and the posterior cricoid region. It helps guide food into the esophagus and away from the larynx during swallow. And then the esophagus, obviously, it's labeled, but it's a little too far. It's a little too far down. There's a label, 20. It's the passageway for food and connects the pharynx to the stomach and the posterior wall of the larynx. And then 21 is labeled by this little toothpick pointing to it. It's the two little glittery, you can't really see, it's too dark, the glittery pieces down there. For the vocal processes, it's a site of vocal fold insertion and the medial process of the arytenoid cartilage, and movement of this moves the vocal folds back and forth. And I made this out of like string and this like meshy paper, and I got really into sewing from it, and foam stuff and pipe cleaners. So yep, that's it.